still don't hear anybody talking about Juneteenth. So he began to educate me on, oh, you know what, the slaves, you know, they didn't know about this in Texas then, and et cetera, et cetera. So I want to start off by asking this question. What is Juneteenth? What exactly is Juneteenth? It's a significant date in American history and the African American experience. And I think I'm on the wrong slide. So let me start off with this. I don't believe that you can have any serious conversation in this country without starting with Frederick Douglass first. And why? Because Frederick Douglass, and little history really kind of, there's little history that really talks about this, but you know, President Abraham Lincoln didn't just all of a sudden get the Holy Spirit and decide to free the slaves. It didn't happen like that. He had a whole lot of folks in his ear. And one of those people that was in his ear was Frederick Douglass. And so the importance of this is this question that Frederick Douglass once famously asked, what to a slave is the 4th of July? So I believe we have to start off with that question, and we have to juxtapose this question with what is the significance of Juneteenth to African Americans today by looking back at what Frederick Douglass was asking some years ago about what the significance of the 4th of July is. So let's just kind of think back for a second. On July 5th, 1852, Frederick Douglass gave a keynote address at the Independence celebration and asked what to the slave is the 4th of July. We all know that Douglass was a powerful orator and a powerful speaker, but the point of the matter was that he was saying, that's not my holiday, that's your holiday. And because that's your holiday, what is the significance to me? So let me go back to the story that I asked, or the story I was telling in the beginning with my white colleague saying, what are you going to do about Juneteenth? And me thinking, I'm not going to do anything about it. What is it? So at that particular time, 30 years ago, Juneteenth was not a legal holiday in the United States. And I'm always a question about the government is willing to spend money to legalize a holiday for the emancipation of slaves in this country? Inquiring minds want to know. What is the real purpose of this? So Juneteenth, we said, is a significant date in American history and in the African American experience. It's a nameplate. On June 19th of 1865, on that day when the Union Army made its way into Galveston, Texas, under the leadership of General Gordon Granger, and announced to all the people of Texas that all enslaved African Americans were free. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this because just because folks in Galveston were free didn't mean that other states weren't still practicing slavery. And the fact of the matter is that even though it took 2 years for this word to get down there, the Confederate states said, we don't care what Lincoln said. That's what he said up there, y'all. We ain't got nothing to do with that down here. As a matter of fact, we're going to keep things the way that they were, status quo. So the Union Army had to send some folks down there to say, wait a minute, y'all. Now, I know y'all, we done already whipped y'all up. We got to come down here and do some more justice for y'all to free these slaves. Now, I want to go back to this thing about Frederick Douglass. So was Lincoln really, was the Civil War, this is a question for you all, because we're going to make this dialogical. Was the Civil War really about slavery? Yes, no? By show of hands, who believes that the Civil War was really about freeing the slaves? I got one hand in the back. Anybody else believe the Civil War was solely, quote, about freeing the slaves? No? Let me tell y'all what Lincoln said. Slavery was the second issue for him. Getting the country back together was the first issue for him. For the states that had succeeded, he was trying to basically unify the country. So remember, it wasn't too long ago that we had fought the Revolutionary War. So we didn't want to lose that power of the unification of the state because somebody could have come in and taken over the United States again. So we need to get everybody on the same page. One thing, that's the first thing Lincoln's doing. This whole notion that Lincoln decides to bring black folks in to free them was this, y'all. If I don't know the territory where I'm fighting the war, I got to get the people who best know the territory. And who knew the territory better than Slaves. So this notion that I'm trying to take over these states that have succeeded, and I need to get them all in here, I got to get the other folks involved in this. Y'all, there's a whole lot of states that there were more slaves than there were free people, more white folks. So I got to get these folks, because you know what? They can help me win this war. It almost sounds parallel to I can win the presidency if I elect a black, if I get a vice president who's a sister, and I get her to talk to the other folks, and I get y'all involved in this. I'm just kind of saying, y'all, we got to think about this. There's some strong parallels about how history tends to repeat itself. So even though we know that the Emancipation Proclamation freed Americans in rebelling states, Texas being one of them, and you know, if you all are into really history, you need to read about how African Americans to gain freedom went down into Mexico. And we got all these brothers and sisters that are in Mexico. So we talk about what's happening at the border right now, but we don't realize that we have a deep history with Mexico, at least African Americans do, in terms of one of the places that allowed us to come there to be free. So we know that the Civil War had ended in 1865, and for a while it took freedom to make its way to most Western rebelling states, although there were enslavers who were aware of the implementation of the Emancipation Proclamation, it wasn't until June 19, 1865, that it was actually enforced with the Union Army. June 19 freed enslaved people in rebelling states. It did not free enslaved people throughout the nation. Specifically, I'm going to show you this map. I'm going to show you a map in a few minutes. But Kentucky and Delaware, which were states that were part of the Union, were still practicing slavery. Kentucky and Delaware. Y'all got any relatives from Kentucky and Delaware? So the interesting part about this is history does not, I don't know about y'all, but I didn't learn none of this in the classroom when I was taking history courses. I just thought everybody it was the North versus the South. And that we didn't realize that there were states in the North where there were still not black, where there were still people who were being held in slavery. So I think that's important that we really kind of go back, especially as we talk about what is the significance of Juneteenth for us, to realize that everybody has never been on board with African Americans being free. Still not. So keep in mind, you know, there were these border states, you know, I talked about Kentucky and Delaware. They had not succeeded from the Union, but they still maintained slavery. Maryland, the significance of a brother as governor in Maryland. Maryland is one of these states that was like, we don't care. We keeping the status quo, y'all. We like this free labor. It took the creation of the Emancipation Proclamation, the end of the Civil War, and the passage of the 13th Amendment to finally end slavery throughout the nation. Now, you know, for a long time, I never really understood what Reconstruction was really all about. But it's the country trying to rebuild itself after the Civil War. Remember, Lincoln wasn't thinking, you know, I'm just kind of freeing y'all because I want y'all to be free. And we're going to look at that more when we look at what was this actual order? What were the words in the order? Because the order itself only relegated us to second-class citizenship. So, you know, I talk about the 13th Amendment that ended slavery, the 14th Amendment that provides citizenship, due process, and equal protection, and the 15th Amendment that provides the opportunity to vote and hold office. We're still fighting for the right to vote. I just saw something on BBC News last night that there's still this thought that we can rig election machines by putting software in there. Now, I'm an engineer, y'all, by trade, so I'm really on this whole thing about what's happening with AI. Don't y'all think that they're not going to try to steal some more votes? And now that we have AI, we can do it, and you don't even know about it. You know, so I wanted to show this map here to give you all oh, I'm changing my slides up here, but I have not changed the slides up there. I'm sorry. I wanted to show this map because I needed you all to get a kind of a geospatial understanding about who these slave states were, who the free states were, slave territories, and free territories. So you see most of the colors in blue, that sky blue, that's where the Union, that's where folks were free. This is where Frederick Douglass makes his way from the South into the north to become free, really at the behedging of his wife, who said, look, Mary Adams, I believe she says, you know, in order for us to really thrive, we can't do this the way this is. We got to go where there's freedom. So she pushes him on up to the north, where he gains his freedom. I think it's so important. Frederick Douglass is such an important person in our history that, you know, one of the things that, if I had to say, if I had to look around and kind of gauge the age here, for anybody that's got a grandchild in here, you need to have them talk about Frederick Douglass. Because he represents this notion that no matter what I do, I know God intended for me to be free. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get there to be free. But again, on this map, if you look at, you look down in the, you look at Texas here, look at all those states in red that are slave territories. This is who Lincoln is fighting against. He's trying to reunite the country. He got a lot of work to do, y'all. And all these states hold slaves. And this was, if you look at this in 1861, so I have a little other legend in there that says, you know, in 1789, there were 8 slave states and 5 free states. But if you go on up to 1861, which is the period we go from the Civil War from 1861 to 1865, you see there were 15 slave states and only 19 states where freedom was there, or so-called freedom, really second-class citizenship. So again, what is Juneteenth? It's not just an event that has local impact, it has regional, national, and an international impact, meaning that it's just not about what we do in the United States. It has far-reaching impacts on folks that are in what we call the African diaspora. So folks in Africa, folks in Europe, wherever African folks got dispersed to, this notion that we're now free, this is the point that I'm really trying to make there. And again, I want you to know about, if you read those books or some YouTube articles or some articles that are out there, they all just talk about this General Order Number 3 and this General Granger. But I need you all to really understand what this really, yes. So this is what I want to talk about. So this is the actual wording of General Order Number 3. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with the proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Now, I've highlighted some stuff here in yellow for us to talk about. All slaves are free, but we know that all slaves weren't free. Still slaves in the Union who have slaves. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property. But this is kind of interesting, y'all, because the reason we need the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments is because we were property. But here's this proclamation saying an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that they have a relationship between the employer and hired labor. Which one of y'all who goes to work feels that y'all are equal with your boss? Any of y'all feel y'all equal with the CEO? Because this is really what this is saying. They're equal. But how can the slave who has nothing be equal to the person who has been holding them in bondage? Do you all get where I'm going with this? The freemen are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. Where did the slaves live? On the plantation. In what house? Not the big house. The shack house in the back, if you even had a shack house. So this is an interesting order. Y'all free, but don't go nowhere. And you need to work for the same wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts. That's no loitering, y'all. That means I don't want y'all getting together to try to plan nothing. No Black Wall Street, No, Lord, no, don't get together, y'all. Now, this is specifically saying a military post, but you may take this to understand the notion of over-policing in this country, because it's always been about, I don't want y'all to get together. Here it is in black and white, and they will not be supported in their idleness, either there or elsewhere. Idleness. What does that mean? Thank you, Reverend. Laziness, doing nothing. Here we have the beginning of this mythology that black folks are lazy. General Order Number 3, issued by General Gordon. So this is, I just wanted you to hear this, because at all these celebrations that we have taking place, you're not going to hear this. So, or the notion of why, again, what is the significance of Juneteenth to black folks today? When we understand that in the origin of Juneteenth, it was all about us being second-class citizens. It was all about us, about a status quo to a certain extent. Anybody got any questions? I see a lot of people shaking their heads and going, y'all good? Everybody's good? Yes? Everybody live streaming is good? You're shaking your heads and I can't see you. So, the former slaves and masters now have the relationships of employers and employees. We talked about that. They are expected to stay in their current homes, which were essentially their slave cabins, and they're expected not to engage in idleness. It breaks down those notions of how society really viewed black people at that time. As a black person, you had to contend with not the Confederacy, but now you have to contend with the notion of the folks that are telling you you're free, which was that you're free to be a second-class citizen. I'm sorry, I didn't mute my phone. So, who celebrates Juneteenth? Juneteenth is an event for everyone to pause and really think about both the meaning and the manifestation of freedom. The meaning of freedom and the manifestation of freedom. How freedom is actually implemented. How freedom comes about. Juneteenth should be important to anyone. It's not just about celebrating black freedom. It's about celebrating how important black people have been in the formation of the United States. The thing that's always interesting to me is how other folks come into the country and believe that we're second-class citizens, even though it is our freedom that has allowed them to immigrate here. I'm reminded of a quick story. I'm reminded of some friends I had from the Bahamas who came to a watch night service here at Zion Hill several years ago. And they came and they had a lot of questions about, well, what is this whole thing about watch night and what's this Liberation Eve thing all about? And it really led to a very in-depth discussion between me and them, in which they said, that's the problem with you black folks. When my dad came over here from the Bahamas, he didn't have to ride on the back of the bus. I was thinking, really? And I said, that's a very interesting hierarchical perspective that you have, that you as a Bahamian, the last time I checked, the Bahamas is a port that slaves went to as well, are believing that you are better than folks who came to this country. And that you are sitting here with me because of the labors of the folks of our ancestors, but the ones that look more like me that were here. That conversation really didn't go too well. So how black celebrations of freedom are a reminder of how contingent freedom is for everyone. It's the notion that if we aren't free, then no one else can be free. Thank you. So Juneteenth is for generations to come, the children and the elders to share our history. And I think that's really important about sharing our history, because I believe that that's part of the breakdown in our society, is that people don't know their history. Because people haven't been taught their history. Because we've been told our history, that first of all, we don't have a history, and second of all, that our history is not important. We have a second-class history, and if people are consistently viewed as second class, who wants to know about their history? So I think that that's extremely important to share in our history, which is really, really important. I heard Pastor Mrs. Parker that we have our Rites of Passage program coming back. So I've had 2 folks go through the Rites of Passage, and my daughter will go through when we start this back. Let me tell you how important this is. So the notion that you have a group of people in your church who are telling you who you are, how to deal with the police if they stop you, how to deal with societal pressure, how to deal with bullying and all this other kind of stuff, and really enforcing your identity is so crucial, because the reality is that, and I'm juxtaposing this to our scholarship. So when you go off to school, one of the very first things that you begin to wrestle with is your identity. Well, if your identity cup is empty, who do you become? Rites of Passage is coming back, right, Pastor Parker? Any questions so far? Any questions on anything I'm presenting? Everybody's here? Yes. So I see a couple questions.
So, goodness, this thing's loud. So they're trying to write us out of history. And so my question is, what are we going to do about it, all of us? I think it's great what we're doing here at the church, the rites of passage and educating our children, but I also think we need to make sure as a whole that we're not written out of history. If it's one state, it can go to another state and another state. So, and it's very important, I believe.
I have a question. So let me address her question first. And this is a dialogue. I don't have all the answers here. But one of the ways that I believe that we have to not allow ourselves to be written out of history is to be the history writers. So there's a whole series we used to talk about in another class that some of us used to teach here, that until the lion learns to tell his story, the story will always be told from the perspective of the hunter. So the lion, us, the hunter, must tell our story. So the narrative of